Hello and welcome back to the Motogp Xtra podcast. I'm Rhys, and joining me as always to discuss the events of the weekend is my co-host Dill. From last week to this, you couldn't get more contrasting venues as the paddock moved from the Flow Mugello to the tight and twisty Sachsenring, which of course means that we had a pretty different weekend. So we may as well get straight into Moto 3. It is a little bit more like what we've had the last few years in terms of we're having a bit of a spread, but it's still unusual to get such a big spread in Moto 3. Let you take it away, Dill. There was plenty of distance between the leaders and the riders a bit further behind this week.
Yeah, there was a bigger pace. We'll actually start with Saturday with Sasaki's pole time. That would have put him heavily in the middle, kind of top 20s on the Moto2 grid. He had so much pace for it to actually be qualifying some Moto2 bikes. Sachsenring is really corner speed tracker. It's very, every corner leads into another. It's one of those ones, if you mess up, we'll say Omega, you can mess up the whole 5, 6, 7, 8, all that sector can be moved up and messed up. So it was no surprise to see that Moto3 bikes were so close this weekend in terms of other bikes, but actually on track there was a massive spread. We had two men run away early in the start. There was a huge gap back to them. I think it was 10, 12 seconds back to third. It was one of the
ridiculous.
It was one of the most spread Moto2 races we've seen in some time. I'd go as far as say years, but it was still quite entertaining. It went down to the final corner, but yeah, a real spread between Anshu and Sasaki had the pace, and then we had Holgado and Artola battling for third, and then again there was another big gap back to the likes of Messia, Moreira, and that kind of group there were battling for kind of 5th, 4th, 6th, that kind of area, but really spread out race, and it was something different, but it was still a good watch.
Yeah, it was something a little bit different, and I think that's kind of the nature of the Sachsenring. I think that's kind of happened over the years a few times, but it was, like we said, quite unusual. So you mentioned, of course, the two guys fighting for the win. Sasaki on pole by over a second, which is virtually unheard of in Moto 3. And considering how short the track of Sachsenring is, 1.1 seconds at Sachsenring is like 1.5, 2 seconds at any other track because of how short it is. So it was a phenomenal performance. And like you say, he actually would have qualified 23rd place in the Moto 2 category, which is unbelievable. And actually, his lap time was a few seconds quicker than what some riders were doing at the end of the MotoGP race when the tyre kicked in. So that really does show you the pace that he did have. But he broke away initially from the start. But then Dennis Onshu, chasing his first ever win, got past Holgado and Ortola and started to hunt him down. It was a proper good scrap. I thought a couple of times it might go a bit wrong. Onshu, in the past, he's pulled some aggressive passes and he looked a few times into that last corner. But to be fair to Onshu, he kept it very clean, didn't he? It was a really clinical ride and a fantastic win from Dennis.
Yeah, we've on this podcast we've been plenty critical of his race, just his overall racecraft and his it's like his mental state in the race. He seems to get wound up really quick and just gets really stressed and goes from 0 to 100 when he has the pace, and then some races he throws away because he just does always something with Dennis. But today he was P3 for a while, he's behind Holgado, and it looked like he just had something extra than Holgado, but wasn't able to make the move for a couple of laps, which is very unlike Anshu. It just shows the nature of the track, that it's not a track that usually lends to lots of overtaking, so it did take a couple of laps for him to get into P2. When he got to P2, I was kind of thinking Sasaki out front, had a second over everyone qualifying. It's all about corner speed. He's known for his high entry speed and nice mid corner speed. Unless Sasaki makes a mistake, it's probably going to be a spread out win to second, and then another gap back from second to third. But Anshu found something and he started to reel him in, and then you see Sasaki take a tent back, and it was kind of coming down, and it kind of held in for a while, and Anshu seemed to have an issue with his left leg. He kept tapping it. The first time I saw it, right, I was really confused because it looked like he tapped the back of his bike, and I was like, dude, there's literally 4 seconds behind you, there's no one to be tapping. But then a couple of corners later he does it again, and then it actually looks like he's punching his left thigh. We'll cover more of that in a minute, but he does close the gap in the end too, Sasaki, and it was a good little battle towards the end. It was very tactical, and in fairness, Anshu's gone up a lot in my estimations after how he managed to play the last couple of laps, especially the final corner.
Yeah, he's definitely learned a lot more. I think in the past we would have definitely seen him send it basically as soon as he caught Sasaki. In the past, we would have seen him crash, like just trying to sort of pass him in a stupid place, or pass him and then try and gap him and just go over the limit and crash. But it was really good the way he caught him, because Sasaki had a not insignificant lead, a pretty decent lead, what was about 2 seconds, which in the end, when you look at how far those two were ahead of everybody else, doesn't seem that big. But to actually catch that up is pretty incredible. And someone who, like we said, had a whole second over the field in qualifying, it's a really, really decent race from Onchu. He played it perfectly as well, of course. He didn't go for anything too silly, but it wasn't very easy. Well, it was obviously a relatively good ride for him, but it wasn't an easy ride for him because, obviously, like you say, he had this weird issue with his leg. We saw his leg sort of came off the foot peg initially, and then we saw him sort of starting to hit his leg, and the commentators were picking up on it, like, don't know what he's doing, because to start with, I was like, well, what's he tapping for? Because we know that, in fact, we spoke about it in the last podcast, that Onchu is always waving his arms around, he's always tapping the seat, sort of being a bit irate on the bike, and it was like, what's he doing? But then it became clear that he was hitting his leg, and then it seemed like, has he got a dead leg? And then it seemed like he was rubbing his calf by the end when we saw some of the shots showed after the race. So I don't know exactly what the issue was. I don't know if you have any more insight onto that one, but it seems very, very strange, but didn't manage to stop him in the end. He did manage to still come out on top. One of the more bizarre ways to win a race, it must be said, trying to massage your leg at the same time.
Yeah, well, it was a rare issue you see in a race where riders actually, you can visibly see that there's something physically wrong. Apparently it was caused by a previous injury is all I have. I don't have any actual specifics on what caused it, but previous injury, a bit of a dead leg, and it just looks like he was just trying to wake his leg up, for want of a better phrase, throughout the race. You got to remember, Sachsenring is just left after left after left after left. Your left side of your body is constantly loaded when you're going left. When you're hanging off, all your muscles are extended, and you're using so much physical force on these bikes. So it's something that we overlook in the sport, that they are human and they are absolutely physically being demanded for the whole race. So when you see someone having an issue like that, you think it's quite strange, but it does seem that it was a previous injury that did cause it. But he did even more than I thought he could, considering he had some sort of dead leg injury that it was causing him definitely some pain, because most laps going through, we'll say from Omega through to the top of the waterfall, he'd have a couple of goes at his leg. He'd have kind of a little tap at the back of his leg or just above his knee. So it was quite strange at the time, because we didn't know the information that it was a dead leg, and we didn't know that it was a previous injury that was causing it. We first off, a lot of people thought when he went for the lower leg, for around the calf, that might have been the boot, that he was trying to adjust the boot. Then around the knee, people think maybe it's his knee slider. So it was, again, throughout the race, there was a lot of speculation what it could be, but turns out in the end, some old injury kind of came at him in such a demanding race, and he did exceptionally well, really, to not only to maintain the pace, but go and fight Sasaki for the win.
We've seen in the past a rider looking really good on form and then having some sort of injury, or not an injury they've actually picked up in the race, but an injury that they've had previously, or some sort of muscle issue. Probably a good example, Quartararo back in 2021 at Jerez. Looked like he was going to dominate that race, started suffering with the arm pump, and then barely scored any points. But Onchu, to be fair, he didn't put a foot wrong, did he, all race, to be quite honest. He played the race perfectly when he caught up to Sasaki. He did a fantastic job to catch Sasaki in the first place, and then he was obviously battling his leg as well throughout the whole race. So it was fantastic for Onchu. And the amount of times we've said that, he needs to calm down, he needs to do this and this and this and this. But he's finally managed to put it together. He's finally got his first race win, and I'm sure more will come now. 2 races in a row, he's really looked like probably the fastest guy in the race, and now he's actually managed to deliver it to the line. But the guy who won that last race and dragged into the line, Danny Holgado, the championship leader, a pretty good weekend for him, a champion's ride, really. It's one of these weekends where he wasn't the fastest guy, but he beat everybody he needed to. I mean, I suppose you could argue that Sasaki technically could be a championship contender still, but the amount of times Sasaki crashed out of races, he put himself out, even though on pace he probably should be. He's put himself out, but Holgado, beating all his championship rivals, looked like it wasn't an easy race for him, because he had to try and keep Ortola behind the whole time, but just did what he needed to do, brought home some more points and extended his lead. Has he got like a 40-point lead now? It's a pretty big lead for Moto3, so Holgado really putting himself in the driving seat as we come towards this summer break.
Yeah, so you need to think that Messia is his main kind of championship threat at the moment, and he was battling for P8 most of the race. The likes of Moreira, who started the season well, he's had a couple of weekends now where he's just not been on it. A couple of penalties here for silly things, and just having strong weekends kind of going away from him, and just looking like he was struggling for pace this weekend. So again, we mentioned in the last podcast that Holgado seems to be able to just get 99% out of the weekend each weekend. He doesn't seem to mistakes. He's not making many opportunities for his rival to gain points back, and when we get further into the season, we probably will see Sasaki maybe catch the likes of Masia, and then we think, oh, maybe there could be a little battle. But at that point, he's beaten him so many times when he's crashed. He's only losing 4 points to him today, 5 points to him last week. There's only small gaps, and he's beating him every other week. So he's gapping everyone, but he's gapping the main people at the right time. So he's on a real strong trajectory for the season. And if he keeps up, again, another good result next weekend in Assen, he's going to be heavily favoured going into the summer break, and he can rest well knowing that he's in a good position for his championship.
Yeah, he really is. He really is setting himself up, and this is what wins you championships in Moto3. It's not necessarily winning every race, because in Moto3 it's so random, it's impossible to do that. It's having good days when your rivals have bad ones. But moving on to Moto2 then, and the chaos started absolutely immediately in the Moto2 race. Another first lap collision, unfortunately for Darren Binder, being knocked off again. That's 2 races in a row now. At the first corner, he's been taken out through no fault of his own. But the causer of the incident, someone that is pretty well known around the MotoGP paddock and obviously in the MotoGP sort of fan base for causing a lot of incidents himself. Obviously, last weekend, taking Rory Skinner out in a practice session and putting him out of a race. This time, takes out Bo Schneider, and, well, he hit Bo Schneider really hard into the corner, bashed him straight into Darren Binder. Down they both went, and I think we have in the notes here that Bo's broke his collarbone. I didn't actually know that, but causing an accident there. Jeremy Alcoba once again. I'll let you take it away, Dill, because I'm sure you've got some pretty strong things to say.
At first, right, when I saw first live, I actually thought it was completely Bo Schneider's fault. Because it's the kind of helicopter shot kind of skewed it for me, because you see what would be the Gresini bike of Alcoba come in really hot, but then you just see Bo Schneider kind of get punted, but it looks like Bo Schneider was the one that came from a long way back. He tags the back of the Darren Binder, goes over the top, lands really awkward backwards up in the air, rolls through the gravel. Unlucky again for Darren Binder, but thankfully he's escaped injury. Unfortunately, a week before his home race, Bo Schneider has broken his collarbone. I believe it's his left collarbone he's broken. No fault of his own. He's having a good season. Obviously got his first podium recently. You thought he'd have a good weekend. Long levers, really be able to wrestle the bike and Assen. You thought that could be a really good weekend from him. Whether he'll be declared fit or not, I don't know. I know that it is possible to ride with broken collarbones. It's pretty common in the world of bike racing, but will he be at full strength for his home race? No. Alcoba, idiotic. Came from miles back, absolutely smashes into the side of the kind of hopeless Bo Schneider. Bo Schneider didn't really do anything wrong, was on his line, got absolutely smashed into it. Then the resulting incident was really aggressive and really horrible what happened. He got a long lap penalty, still scored points, I believe, or maybe finished 16th. He was right on the cusp of points. I'm thinking at this point now we should be at race bans. Like, he's had a incident last weekend where he's pushed Rory Skinner out. This weekend into what is everyone knows is a tight first corner. You're not going to be able to brake late and make up time. It's going to get tight the whole time. There's going to be 25, 30 bikes trying to funnel away through what is really a 1 or 2 line corner. It's a first scare little hairpin. It's nidgery, it's awkward. It does lots of things could go wrong there. You don't do that. That needs a harsh penalty. We're going to probably cover the officials after all 3 classes as we usually do, but it just seems this weekend they were on holidays already. Most penalties that we would expect from previous 5-6 rounds we have not seen. A lot of penalties were overlooked. Any penalties that were given out seem very light like this. This should, at least for this race, been a double long lap, and I still think back to grid for next race. That should be fair after what he did last week as well, but a long lap, it ruins his race, but he's put Bo Schneider at risk of missing his home race now. He's put Darren Binder out for another race, so it's Alcoba he's known for it. He's a bit of an idiot on the bike. They need to step in and make it to the point where he has to clean up his act, because if he keeps going like this, he's going to keep injuring people. He's going to keep getting these long laps for doing these idiotic moves, and it's silly really at this point. They need to really clamp down on him, and particularly him, because he's doing a lot of these issues and he's causing so many incidents when there's just no need.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's obviously turn 1 at a really tight track, like you say, so these incidents are bound to happen. So I'm not saying that, for this specific incident, you should get a really harsh penalty, like a race ban or a back of the grid or something. But yeah, a single long lap for taking out 2 riders and injuring 1 is not really enough. But then again, at the same time, I guess you have to look at the mistake itself rather than the outcome, of course, because just if the guy happens to fall a different way, doesn't pick up an injury, that shouldn't change the penalty. But yeah, a single long lap's not really enough for taking out two people like that. Like we say, literally last week he took somebody out. He obviously took Skinner out and injured him. In the past, he's done plenty of things before. I mean, in my opinion, he should have done a race ban years ago because, when he had all the incidents with, it wasn't just John McPhee, but of course it was mainly John McPhee. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's the same rider over and over again. If you're taking out people every weekend, then surely you need to have some sort of penalty. I mean, we've seen before they have used people as scapegoats. We've had Dennis Onchu, for example. Obviously, he weaved on the straight back in Texas, of course, that big pile up, which he was rightfully penalised for. But people weave every week and don't get anything for it. So they don't seem to do anything until a big incident happens. And Alcoba's just been allowed to get away with this throughout his whole career, basically causing incidents, being aggressive on the bike, just being pretty bad. I remember, when was it? Was it was Assen 2021? Was it? I think he was on pole that weekend. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure he deliberately held up people in qualifying, which again he got unpenalised for. I could be remembering that wrong because it was a long time ago, but I seem to remember he deliberately did get in people's way. So again, clearly doesn't care, doesn't have any sort of interest in actually obeying the rules most of the time, and he just completely gets away with it. But from the back of the grid then to the front of the grid, it obviously was set up fantastically for a showdown between the two title rivals, first and second on the grid, but no one could lay a glove on Acosta once again, just like in Mugello. Absolute domination, 3 seconds clear, which obviously, again, like we say, Sachsenring a short circuit, obviously is a bit more like having a bigger gap in other places, but he got to the front, built out a big lead, and then just managed it from there, like we've seen him do many times before. What do you think to Acosta's performance so far, Dill?
He was metronomic throughout the race. I was actually quite surprised it was his first pole position in Moto2. When I saw that it was
second.
Well, BT were saying it was his first one, so what a surprise.
They said it was the first one of this year. I think they said the last time.
Oh, fair enough. My mistake.
It was Le Mans last year when he fell off.
Yeah, I actually remember that. That's anyway. But he was
BT. It's your fault, Bill.
Yeah, for once it's my fault. Usually it's BT's fault. I get away with this one.
You didn't do a lot wrong. It's all right.
Usually, you see Moto2 riders having a bit big of a spread throughout the race in terms of lap times. They showed his race pace with about 2.5 laps to go. And from lap 6 to lap 18, there was 0.3 to 0.4 of a spread. He is absolutely ridiculously good. We're going to come to Arbolino in a minute, but I just think that he has a step above everyone. Obviously, crashing out 2 weekends ago has opened the championship to make it a bit more interesting. But it's a bit like Pecco. If you didn't make that mistake, if you didn't have a bad race in Argentina in the wet weather, I think the championship would be already over. If I'm Arbolino, I'm kind of hanging on to the back of him, and I'm just kind of mitigating the damage. It's like the ship is sinking. He's just slowing it down. I think it's inevitable that Costa keeps going on. He's going to Assen next weekend. The track he's done well in Moto3. It was decent there last year. It's a high-speed track. He's going to be good everywhere. He's on such good form. The future is already bright from that. We know that he's more than likely going to be in GP next year. We just don't know in which colours. So whether that will take his eye off the ball, maybe, because there's a lot of off-track chats going on with him, and there's a lot of interest from other teams. We know that there's a deadline for Acosta to get an offer from KTM. Otherwise, he can go and officially speak with other teams. Now, obviously, every team in the paddock will already have a word with him at this point and see what the kind of situation is. But there'll be official inquiries after, I believe it's the end of the summer break or around the summer break.
It's the end of June, I think.
Is it? So
I think it's the 31st or 30th of June. I don't know what the last day of June is, but
yeah,
I think if they haven't given him a MotoGP offer, I think he can then go talk to other teams.
That would be kind of midweek after Assen, so that's not long away.
Break, I guess. Yeah.
So you would think that the thing is, right, for KTM to move him up, Jack Miller's going nowhere, Brad Binder's going nowhere. Paul Espargaro, I could see him being moved. I could also see him moving Augusto. Nothing to do with performance. I just think they're cutthroat and they realise they have a generational talent in Moto2 and they'll want him to come up. Whether he'll be okay with going to a second tier team in a way, GasGas, the Tech 3 team, it is a satellite team. his talent probably deserves a factory seat. Whether he will get it or not, I don't know. It won't be at KTM because I can't see them moving either Brad or Jack aside from. There's contracts there. There's just too much to move.
They could maybe move Jack into Gas. That's the only way I could see him actually getting straight into the Red Bull KTM team.
I could see that too, but Jack is a direct sponsor to Red Bull as well, so I don't know if that would be as easy as made to see. So there's a lot of building blocks for KTM to get him into the class, and for him to be happy, for them to be happy, and not to put someone else's nose like Jack out of line. And to be fair, Jack, top KTM today, he's done really well to start the season. Probably just doesn't have the outright pace or the race management that Brad Binder has, but he's doing a really solid job for KTM, so I don't think they'd want to anger him by putting him out in when he's doing so well for them at the moment. But in terms of today's race, hit his markers. He put a couple of laps in, I think lap 2 to lap 5, dropped down into the high 23s. Nobody could touch him. Built up about 2 seconds, then it looked like Arbolino had tyre troubles and was coming back to Dixon. At that point, then he just started ticking off the laps, and there was no one touching him today. And I think for the rest of the season, bar injuries, mechanicals, and weather are the only 3 things I could see. I think most weekends he's going to have the pace, and it's going to be a tough uphill challenge really for the rest of the field to try and even lay a glove on Pedro.
Yeah, he's a cut above everybody else. Like you're saying, he would be in the lead of the championship if it wasn't for, obviously, Argentina and Le Mans. Le Mans, if he hadn't crashed there, he'd have 20 more points, so he'd already be 5 in front, I think. So it's actually not quite as dominant as it seems, but again, I think with the amount of points he did lose, because in fairness, Arbolino has been very consistent, and he's obviously won a few races as well this year. But yeah, I think Acosta, you put them both on a dry track, saying, weekend preparation, Acosta's going to win. So yeah, there could be some weird weather later on in the year, but I don't think Acosta's particularly a bad wet weather ride. If you remember back to, was it Styria 2021 with him and Sergio Garcia when it was like wet miles to clear everybody else? It just, obviously for whatever reason, didn't work for him in Argentina that particular weekend, but I'm sure they'll be trying to work on that one. Io's a good team, fantastic rider with Acosta on board as well. He'll have learned a lot in that race. I'm sure next time it is wet, he will probably make a bit more of a step. Arbolino is exceptional in those conditions, of course, but Acosta might still be that good enough to still score some high points. But talking of Arbolino, of course, you did mention it very briefly there. We may as well sort of put this all together. Arbolino obviously tried to go a little bit with Acosta at the beginning, but Acosta passed him pretty much on the first lap and just immediately pulled away. He looked safe for second position, but then he got closed in on by Jake Dixon. Wasn't much more Arbolino could do. Obviously, did manage to fend off Dixon in the end, but it was a good little battle, just riding really, really well. Again, Arbolino, fantastic. Even though he probably didn't quite have the pace of Dixon behind, he seemed to ride the bike, put it in the right places, stop him from being able to pull any kind of pass. And it was a really, really good ride from him. Again, another champion's ride, I guess. On this day, he could accept that he wasn't as quick as Acosta, but obviously he does need to start beating Pedro again, because at this point he's just going to drop further and further back in the championship. If of course he's still leading, but he'll eventually get caught and overtaken if he doesn't beat him.
Yeah, we've seen this last year with Pecco and Fabio. If you can't take points off them, they're just going to steamroll you. And I think I don't want to say fortunate to be leading the championship, because he's been very good in all conditions. He's been quick most weekends. Qualifying, he's weak. All right, this weekend he was better, but again, it was probably a bit of an outlier this weekend that he qualified well. But
Acosta's not particularly a great qualifier either.
That's true, but he seems to have, at least he has the Rossi or the Marquez or whatever you want to say, Lorenzo, where when it matters he's there. He can get his way there. He's not like Zarco where he goes backwards and has to put on a massive overhaul to get there. For whatever reason, Pedro can always just be there when he needs to be, and I think Arbolino doesn't seem to have that about him. He go back to Mugello, he had to come from quite a bit further back. By the time he got to P2, regardless of his pace, he wasn't going to bring that down to Pedro. This weekend, he was there. Pedro had the pace over him comfortably. I think going forward, we're going to see more of this. I think looking at Texas, race like that, he had to capitalise on the fact that he was kind of 50-50 on pace with him, and he was thereabouts. Now, I think Pedro just slightly outsmarted him there, but I think probably Mark VDS know themselves that if things go, it's kind of like I look at it with the Davi Marquez year 2017, where undoubtedly Marquez was quicker, he was better in the races, but if he just makes a couple of mistakes, he might keep Davi in the championship. That's what happened. It went all the way to Valencia. I think that's the only way Pedro throws away this championship to Arbolino, is if one, he crashes again, or he makes some weird mistake. He's not known for making mistakes, really, to be honest. Arbolino is just kind of keeping his points tally going nicely, but it's kind of like the Davi of it. He's like, you kind of have to be doing more to beat someone as talented as him, and I think at the moment he needs that extra step, and I don't see him having it in terms of getting close to Acosta over many races. I think he could probably beat him fair and square a couple of times for the rest of the season, but I still think that like 75-80% of the time it's going to be Acosta who will win out of them battles.
Yeah, Acosta just needs to not make mistakes, like you say, just needs to make sure he doesn't try and send it up the inside into the hairpin at Sepang. But like obviously we saw with a certain championship contender last year.
I'm still not over that.
The box seat. Yeah, we may as well actually talk about him a little bit. He was sort of nowhere again, wasn't he, this weekend? Obviously he's had this injury earlier on in the season, but Agora just nowhere. I mean, and Chantra wasn't doing too bad this weekend. P4 for Chantra, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So Chantra was kind of back on it again, but Agora didn't even get through to Q2. So just terrible season for Agora so far. But someone that's having a pretty decent season, Jake Dixon, we did talk about him pretty briefly there, battling with Arbolino. Another podium for him, the same top three as in Mugello. I think we're probably looking at this point that maybe these are sort of the top three, because I think Dixon's now P4 in the championship, like a couple of points behind Lopez in P3. So to be fair, I think in terms of the pursuers behind, it is looking like Jake Dixon has made a bit of a step, and he just needs to sort out that those race starts, because maybe he could go with the pack a bit more. I mean, of course, he's not getting anywhere near Acosta today. Acosta was so fast, but if he gets a better start, he's potentially beating Arbolino today, and with him being there, he could definitely play a role in this championship, not in terms of competing for it himself, but maybe on Arbolino's slightly worse weekend, he could sort of get between him and Acosta and maybe affect the points a little bit.
Yeah, he's been building. He's been in that team now a couple of seasons, so he's kind of coming a bit more mature, and he's quick, but has a flaw of the same as Zarco, where first off, he's not great in qualifying. Qualified well this weekend, but dropped to P6, P5 at one point when Lopez and Cano went ahead of him. And that's kind of your race run, which might sound silly because you're like, well, a couple of laps he could overtake them again. He's back there. But when you just lose when the band snaps and you're within your 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds back, you have to basically go into the wilderness and go above what you need to be able to do to bring that back. And that kills your tyres. You're taking huge risks, and that's how we've seen that and probably in the past with Dixon. Like, he crashed out of Portimao when he was on for a good chance of the win. Look back at Mandalika when he crashed out. So he's had
Le Mans as well.
Yeah, Le Mans, where
he really should have won that one.
Yeah, that was a science field delivered. Really should have brought that home, but he has I think it's probably still in the back of his mind that when he's in these positions, he needs to ride at 90% instead of giving it everything and going through him, because he does have a crash in him. We're all aware that it seems a bit of a British thing that, like, when they are right at the front, you just don't know, are they over the limit to get there? But it looks like the last couple of weekends, I was really surprised to find out this is his 9th podium in Moto3, all P3s as well. But if I had to guess, I probably would have said it's probably his 4th, maybe 5th. I was still surprised to see that he's nearly in double digits.
The back end of last year was really good. That's why I think, like, he was on the podium a lot. Like, I remember when he was like Sepang, he was battling with like Augusto Fernandez.
Yeah,
like, his second half of last season was actually really, really good. It's just he struggled a little bit at the start of this season, but yeah, so far he seems to be doing pretty well. But yeah, I'm surprised for that stat actually as well. I didn't realize he had quite that many.
But we're coming up now. Like, we've asked next week, a couple of weeks off for summer, and then we're going to Silverstone. He's kind of getting into a nice vein of form. Whether he has anything more than P3, I don't know. I think on genuine raw race pace, I'd say no, because I don't see him to be able to fix his race starts. I think that is just an inherent flaw he has of not having confidence in lap 1, 2, 3. Heavier fuel load. This was something that, if you're a long time GP follower, Cal Crutcher could never do it. He could never get the M1 Yamaha going in the first 5 laps. Would drop a couple of seconds behind Lorenzo and Rossi, and that was his race run. Then he could never kind of get back, and kind of on the weekends where he looked like he was really strong and had a chance to win, had the pace, his race starts, the opening couple of laps, he just couldn't deal with the full tank of fuel. It looks like Dixon maybe has that issue as well, where he just takes a couple laps for the fuel to go down, the tyres to get in the window. Then he's as quick as Acosta, quicker than Arbolino today. But again, these classes are so tight. You don't give them a five lap kind of cool off period before you go at them. You need to be on the back wheel within a second the whole race, so that you can manage your tyre, keep cool, keep calm, and then go for it with 8-9 laps to go and see where it works out. But he's building, he's getting better. I don't know, one, does he have the team behind him to, like, you're looking at Marc VDS and you look at IO, they are your creme de la creme, they're your factory teams, we'll say, in Moto 2. Gas, nothing wrong with them, but I just don't think that they're going to be able to bridge the gap.
A very fantastic team, I suppose, back in the day.
But it just, at the moment, I just think the whole package, him, the team, you're kind of going up against it, really. And I think maybe there's some weekends where it might work out, maybe get a bit of weather. We know he's quick in the wet, but I think it's going to be hard, really, to get a P2 or win this season for him. But we never know. Silverstone, British rider home, has thrown up some results in the past.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see when we get back from the summer break for that one. Although, of course, there is still a race next week. For someone in a fairly similar position in terms of not really being able to challenge the front two, Aaron Canet was running third place, very early on in the race. He'd actually forced his way past Dixon himself. But then he crashed at the last corner. A very, very common sight these days, seeing Aaron Canet walking away out of a gravel trap. It's just not working out for him. He's been in Moto2 for a fair few seasons now, as he did a couple of seasons with Aspar, and now he's done a couple of seasons with the Pons. And we really thought, once he got onto that Calex, it would be the time. Again, another historically old team that always used to be really good, but perhaps is not quite up to the modern standards. But even still, just Canet, once again, another mistake. It's just really common, isn't it? He's just not in a position to win these races so far. He's crashing out of third place. He's obviously been trying to break that wind up for a while. He broke the bow tie to try and give him the look, but just doesn't seem to be working for him.
Yeah, I think he's probably, it sounds harsh, but I think he's missed the boat already for GP. I think already he is past the window going. The only way I could see it happening now is a bit like Lucy, where he was in the class for so long and he was kind of at the sharp end for so long that someone eventually took a punt on him. Marc VDS Honda, which was a terrible bike, terrible decision for Lucy. He kind of killed his Moto2 career off as well. Probably his whole career off, really, by taking that step, because he never was the same Lucy that came back down. So
he was decent like the first year, I think, but then they changed the tyre.
They changed the tyre and it just killed him. But it was, before he went up every year, he was one of the main championship challengers. Now, he always kind of went away mid-season and it just never worked. And he'd win a race in like Phillip Island, Malaysia, that time of year, and then you kind of remember he's still there. But after he came back, and then he had a couple of seasons where the tyre changed and he just was nowhere. But I feel like Canet could go the same way. We need to remember a couple of seasons ago, Aprilia wanted him as their up-and-coming rider when they were kind of thinking internally they were on the rise. This was kind of after Reading, that kind of period. They were looking at him and thinking maybe he could be the guy to kind of build a team around. They also went and tried to get Joe Roberts, and both of them crashed out in the final corner today, and both of them are kind of underperforming. But on the Canet front, I just don't see. I think GP at the moment, there's too much talent for the amount of seats. And in terms of getting on one of those seats, you need to be a special rider. You need to be an Acosta. Like we talked about Vietti last year, having a great season. Obviously, crashed his brains out in the end, but showed great speed. And there was rumours of him going to VR46. They've been completely quashed now. There's no talk of him going up now, because he's had kind of a half a season off, and he's been kind of a mid-top 10s, top 8 rider at the moment. I think Canet is going to struggle to get an actual seat in MotoGP. I just, unfortunately, I think he will eventually break the race duck. I think if next year Acosta and Arbolino move up, I think he could be a good, solid man for the championship, but I don't think I don't see him doing it over a full season, because he crashes too much, not only in the races, but he crashes in like FP1, when it's just like, you don't really need to be on the limit now. Like, you don't need to be high-siding on a cold morning in Le Mans, or there's always something with Aaron, and I feel like that is his downfall, and I think that might prevent him in future going up. I could see him going Dami Agata route, going over to Supersport. I could see that happening very strongly.
Yeah, he could end up maybe in the ride with Super Sport or Superbike because, I mean, Xavi Vierge, for example, moved across into the factory Honda team there, and I would say that Cannett's career in Moto2 has been better than Vierge's so far. So, yeah, it definitely could happen for him in the future, but I think you're right. I think he has probably missed the MotoGP boat. But, of course, speaking of MotoGP, the main event, let's move on to that one now. So, of course, as always, with the sprint and the main race, the same winner in both, but very, very different races. And after a really good run of form, Jorge Martin finally back on the top step of the podium in a full race. Of course, I know he won the sprint race back in Le Mans, and of course he won the sprint race here too. But his actual duck of Grand Prix wins since 2021 finally broken. Are we now looking at the man that could take it to Bagnaia? 15 points, I think, is the gap between them. It's not a lot. It's pretty close. So, yeah, I think Martin put himself in a good position. I don't know what you think, but I think I was saying this in the previous podcast that really, for me, Martin is the threat. And this weekend, he absolutely proved that one on the same equipment.
I think Martin right now will be, obviously after his double win, winning the sprint and the feature race today, he'll be absolutely delighted. But I think the back of his head, he'll still be kind of pissed off that he didn't get the factory seat last year. I think he probably will feel like he let himself down, that he underperformed when it mattered. Because if you are long-time listeners, you will remember that I was heavily in favour of Jorge Martin. I have a ceiling a lot higher than Bastianini. Now, Bastianini seemed to be getting more out of the package last year and was not crashing as much and was winning races on what would be a third-tier team, you would say, in Gresini. Whereas the Pramac team has always been known as like the right-hand man of Ducati. Like they've been there for years. They've always been nearly the second team to the factory Bologna boys. So when last year he got pit for, I think it got to his head. I think he started making mistakes. I think it all just got maybe a bit too much from the injuries, the mistakes, the crashing out of the lead into Sepang. There was just so many mistakes that you're like, oh, not again. He's just let himself down again. I think that showed probably why he didn't get the seat. And then took the winter, reset, came back. Pre-season was quick, as you'd imagine he is. There's no question of his speed. It's just whether he can do it for a full race, whether he can complete a full weekend in the right manner, qualify. Qualifying's always been a strong point. It's the racing that lets him down. You never see him struggling come P9 in qualifying. He's always there come qualifying. He is simply one of the best ever to do a qualifying lap, in my opinion. Even his lower categories, he was, like we talked about Sasaki being on pole by 1 second. That was unheard of. That was the things that Martin could do back when he was back on the Gresini Honda back in 2017. He was absolutely rapid on that bike, and his progression into GP and through Moto2 is kind of followed the same suit, where he's always been good over the one lap, and nobody's ever questioned whether he has the talent. It's just whether he can put a weekend together, get to the race uninjured, because we all know that he's injury prone, a bit like Danny Pedrosa in that sense, small in stature, but his talent is so high, his level, his ceiling is so high that if he goes on a run, if he stays fit, there is no reason why that he can't beat Pecco. Now again, you always have to look factory team versus a satellite team. It's never been done unless you class Valentino, but he had that was like a semi-factory team back in the Nastro Azzurro days, so it's not been done. Like we've looked at Zarco, I think 2020 he had a good start, last year he had a good start, 21 he had a good start, and he always seems to go away. We've gotten further into the season now, and Jorge Martin's starting to build. I think as well, the sprint race doesn't suit Pecco. It's not his kind of forte. He's more of a Valentino of such, where
pretty sure he's won more sprint races than anybody. And I think
that's only because he crashes on Sunday. That's where that analogy would come from. I always feel that Pecco is kind of like the Valentino, where the last 8 laps is where he wakes up and where he's ridiculously strong. I think that he has I have a worry with Pecco that if he can get past the first 6 laps, he's kind of okay. He's out of the danger window. And I think that he has a bit of a flaw on him still, but we'll come to him later. But Martin, simply stunning, has the speed, has the equipment. Whether it will be enough over a long season, I don't know, but I think he will keep taking points off him. And I would be very surprised if he doesn't win a lot more sprint races. I really fancy him to sprint. Over the long distance, I think Pecco is a better rider in terms he's more complete. But you never know. I think today Martin would have learned a lot being behind Pecco for a few laps, and he's but the only one you can see that he can actually overtake Pecco at will. He seemed to have a lot of advantage in certain places where you just don't see that with anyone else really. So it's going to be interesting next couple of rounds. I think that we could be going into a really, really tight summer battle here with these two, I'd say.
Yeah, I think he really has shown it. I mean, it's one of those races we'll look back on. It was a great race as well, by the way. I don't think we ever sometimes talk about like how great the battle was, but I think this race could go down as one of the classics in terms of the battle that they had throughout the whole race and going down to the last lap. Like this is it's an old school MotoGP race, isn't it? Really, like two riders pulling away from everybody else on the same bike, absolutely going for it. Yeah, these are the Rossi Lorenzo kind of battles.
Yeah, it did remind me of that today because I think it was a 2010 day battle for second and it was very similar. It was like out of the last
the ending was really similar as well, yeah.
But it did remind me kind of same bike, different countries, Spain versus Italy. It was a lot of similarities of
supremacy, I guess, in a way. Because Martin, he's as much as you say, obviously the decision affected him, which it did, but he's also now got that fire to prove that they made the wrong decision. And at the minute, I mean, you can't really argue against that. Obviously, Bastianini's still injured, but I think even if Bastianini was full fitness, I think Martin is probably outperforming him at the moment anyway. But yeah, it was a fantastic race. So we'll have to see if he can carry it on, but it definitely will be a big confidence builder for Martin, beating Bagnaia in hand-to-hand combat, like they said, on the same equipment. That's a massive confidence booster, and hopefully he can take that into Assen, because we want to see a title fight, don't we? At the end of the day, whoever wins at the end of the day, ultimately it doesn't matter. Obviously, everybody has their favourites, but if we have a battle, that's good, because last year we kind of had a pseudo battle, but never really any on-track action, and this could be like the Bastianini Bagnaia of last year, sort of simmering over a little bit with some hard passes. But another big headline, possibly even the biggest headline of the weekend, really, is Marc Marquez. His best track on the calendar, Sachsenring. He's won it so many times. He's won it at will. He won it with a half-broken arm. It's his track. It's an anti-clockwise track. It's the dirt track. He always gets to the front. He always pulls away. Honda have won here so many times, even before Marquez. Like, I think Pedrosa won on the streak of winning it for quite a few years as well. So it is a track always suited the Honda, but how many crashes this weekend? Was it 5, 6?
5 when he retired from the weekend.
Yeah, 5 crashes for Marquez, all pretty biggish ones, to be fair. Obviously, he had the one at the first corner, which wiped out Zarco's bike as well. It was a nasty crash. Obviously, fortunately, he was unscathed from that one. He had a couple of high sides at the last corner. He then obviously had that crash through the long left in warm-up as well. So many crashes for Marquez. But even before he had some of those crashes, he'd had a moment in practice. He'd lost the rear down through the waterfall, like sort of the front had then gone as well because the rear had pushed it. Then he he had about 3 saves in one. He then flipped the bird to the bike. So that's... the narrative has changed, I think. Obviously, we'll come to your thoughts on it in a minute. But from the last round, he was saying stuff like, the hot bike is hurting everybody, everyone's getting hurt on it, it's too easy to crash this bike. Then he starts off by, flagging the bike. He has all these incidents with it. He came into the pits, he was really angry as well after that big moment, saying he wants to swap through the bike. Has the crash this morning, just looks despondent, looking over the barrier, looking into the lake, just as if he's thinking, I think this is the end of Marquez with Honda, at least. I think the relationship is completely gone now.
Yeah, I'm thinking really, like, I'll start with the start. We'll go back to the 5 crashes. So turn 1, he had 2 crashes. You're doing about 187 miles an hour when you get on the brakes there. So by the time he probably tips off, you're probably doing about 150. The final corner, the one where he kind of low sided, that's about 100. Probably about 80 when he high sides it in Q2. And then we are talking 120 when he went over the bars in turn 7 in warm-up. So you're talking 5 crashes, all at least 100 miles an hour. We know that he bounces. He has done it throughout his career. He's been injured heavily once. And that's kind of what's caused a lot of these issues over the last 3-4 years now. And really, is it getting to the point where, we saw the documentary last year, a lot of his family want him to kind of call it quits. He's won enough. Financially, he'll be okay. He's had the issue with the eyes. He's had the issue with the shoulders. He's broken many parts of his body multiple times. So he's not that young anymore. Like, he's one of the older. He's kind of in the same situation as Rossi was in 2010 when he broke the leg. He was slightly older. He was getting towards what most people would say is, all right, you're kind of starting to kind of go downhill from here. There's no question whether he's still quick enough. It's clear that he is one of, if not the most talented still on the grid. It's hard to see really because the Honda's so bad. So when he does battle the likes of a Pecco or a Fabio, like last couple of seasons, you just don't know how quick actually could he be if he was maybe on an Aprilia or a KTM or something else. So for me, I cannot see how they continue. I just don't see how next year he lines up on a RC2 13V on the grid for probably Qatar if we go back there next year. I don't know if that'll be the opening.
It's going to be the first one again because it's just renovations that have made it be.
I'm actually happy with that because I think the night race to start off the season was I like that.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it?
It's a nice feeling to start the season. I think Portimao this year felt weird to me. But anyway, back to Marquez. I just don't see how he can continue Honda. 5 crashes in one weekend at a track that he absolutely dominates at. There's nothing they can do. Like, and Honda, fair enough, Honda have the might of Honda. They can go and build a bike and they can change a bike. But like they did that in when did they bring that new bike with Paul Espargaro? Was that last year?
Yeah, literally last year. They got the podium and they're like, oh, it's so good.
And yeah, they did nothing with Marquez. Said he has no feeling with the front. Judging by he crashed 3 front ends this weekend. That would be you'd class as the bike. So the 2 turn ones would be the bike locking the front, and the final corner, turn 13, when he lost the front, that would be also that's probably more weather related. But you're still losing your front, like you're still. The bike is not giving you the feeling he needs. So, I don't know. There's going to be a struggle again at Assen, a high-speed track. It doesn't seem to have the stability. It doesn't have the rear grip. I think he'll have a long weekend. That's it again. So he has broken a finger in the warm-up crash this morning. If you haven't seen it, it is pretty rough. He does get barrel rolled around and he looks shaken after it. And I think, it might sound stupid, but after 5 crashes, you probably are thinking, what in the hell am I doing here? After so many big crashes this weekend, and he's lucky it's only a broken finger.
I think between qualifying and the sprint that basically he'd gave up because there was no point. He was putting so much on the line for like 7th, so he probably just decided it's not worth pushing.
Yeah, in the sprint he started well. He was thereabouts and just went backwards. He didn't even look remotely competitive. It didn't look like Marquez. It was quite sad to see he just went backwards. And at a track that he's so good at, it was kind of like, well, it kind of felt like that he just kind of went like, enough's enough. I'm not going to 110% today. Like, I'm not doing it again after having 2 big crashes a Saturday morning, and of course, and probably Saturday night probably kind of went away resetting and came back Sunday morning thinking we're going to give it another go, and then threw himself to the moon and back again. So he's probably had enough, and I just think over the last 2 weekends where he was giving out mad stick about them in Mugello. There's been meetings between top HRC men between Mugello and here in Sachsenring. So there's been conversations. There is going to be something happening. They are not going to continue the way this is going. It cannot happen. I could see him, one, retiring. Don't know how likely that is, or trying to force his way into another manufacturer and buying himself out of his contract. I think at this point he's done enough for Honda where he probably deserves to. They probably should kind of cut his contract. Now, Honda being Honda, I don't think they will. I think that they'll really force him to stay and really make him honour his contract, because the fact that they know if he goes, they are ridiculously in trouble if he goes. Because Mir not going well, Rins broken leg, Nakagami is waiting. He's a seat warmer for Oyagora. If that happens, we don't know if that's even going to happen this year with Oyagora's injury and how poor he's been. So, like, you don't have anyone quick on a Honda. It's scary what could happen to HRC if 93 walks away. But I think it's the end of the 93 on the HRC bike. I don't see it happening. I think maybe the Flyaways will get an announcement whether it's going to be a retirement, which would be quite sad because he's still young. I still think he probably has championships in him. I make the similarity of Rossi 2010, where does he go and try an Aprilia and then turns out that he just doesn't ride that bike as well and he needs a certain type of bike, or is this just starting to go past the point where he's not able to catch these slides, he's not be able to ride above the limit like he used to and win races on just raw talent. I think we all believe that modern day GP is a bit too much for the likes of America's. You can't be a sublime talent. You need a 50-50. You need a really good rider on a really good bike, everything to come together, the team around them. And I think At the moment, it's 90% Marquez, 10% Honda. So, yeah, I've gone on for long enough, but yeah, it could be worrying for the 93 fans out there. I think this could potentially be his last year if he can't get his way out of Honda and to another manufacturer.
Yeah, it'll be tough because that buyout clause will be ridiculous. So whether he'll even be able to afford that is questionable. I mean, he's obviously got to look after himself financially. I mean, I know he's got plenty of money, I'm sure, in the bank, but
I believe it's 25 million is the buyout around. That's the number that's going to turn around.
Which is not an insignificant amount. It's plenty of money. So, it is obviously something he'll have to consider if he's trying to get out. Obviously, the manufacturer that he's going to, I'm sure, won't cover that. So, yeah, we'll have to see. Maybe we'll have to see him sit a year out. It's, again, something not I can really see him wanting to do again. But I suppose he could sit a year out and like really focus on training and just come back like phenomenal, just like ride every day, like his CBR or whatever. Or
hell, if he breaks his Honda contract, it won't be a CBR. He'll be riding.
Yeah, well, I think he's still got one unless they come and repossess it. I don't know. But
I'd say if he cuts ties with Honda, it won't be as bad as when Rossi left in 03, but I think he will be. There will be no more Honda Marquez. I think there will be a bit of I think it could get ugly between them. I think it is right.
We'll see him training on a V2 Panigale.
More like it, yeah.
But anyway, that's probably enough about Marquez for now. Obviously, a struggling manufacturer there with Honda. Another one that seems to be struggling, Aprilia. Their season has just dropped off a cliff. Their last year, they made such a step. They were really good. It was looking like potentially the best bike at some tracks. Testing this year, again, bike looked really good. Looked like they were the only guys that were going to take it to Ducati. Portimao, Vinales is there, second place of the race. Looked like he potentially could have beat Bagnaia with a few more laps. And then basically ever since that, really, it's been nowhere aside from, again, Le Mans. Vinales looking pretty good. But Aprilia, terrible weekend. Absolutely terrible. Sprint race. Well, Vinales crashed twice in a weekend, which obviously doesn't seem a lot compared to Marquez's 5 crashes, but you don't even see Vinales crash twice in a season most of the time. So that's showing you that something's going on there. Aleix, obviously riding injured, but again, didn't look to have the pace. Top Aprilia in the race, in the main race, ended up being Oliveira. Obviously, Aleix made a bad tyre choice with a soft tyre, dropped back towards the end, was actually going slower than the Moto 3 times at the end. So, yeah, terrible race for him. Vinales' Aprilia exploded. So, again, that's pretty rare to see these days, right, in MotoGP. Seems to be Aprilia, though, do have more mechanical issues than the rest. So, again, that's another gremlin. So, Aprilia just look lost now. They don't even look fast. They don't look reliable. It just seemed to have taken a massive step backwards since the very beginning of the season.
I think the big thing with Aprilia is we go back to pre-season. They came with a new slimline bike. It was short. It was more slim. It was easier to ride. It was better everywhere else. They finally felt like they'd made a step in braking. The ride height devices had been more refined. Everything was better. Maverick was loving it. Aleix was saying that he feels like they can make a good go at this year, and they've just not. It's not gone that way. I think if we look at KTM, they had what would be considered a worrying preseason. Got to race 1 and they were ridiculously quick. I think they probably undersold their preseason a bit. And I think maybe Aprilia did the opposite, where they kind of oversold on what they could do. I think preseason flattered them. I think it looks like with the Aprilia, give them an empty, like a test track where the rubber goes down when the grip is there, when the bike is on its own. It seems to be a brilliant bike in that sense. It's kind of like the Yamahas, where leave it on its own, it kind of works its way, but put it in a race situation, it struggles. It's kind of the most M1 V4 out there at the moment. It doesn't seem to be able to. It definitely doesn't punch out of the corner like the KTMs or the Ducatis. It doesn't stop as well. Definitely probably turns the best. It's probably the best handling bike on the grid, but it's not really what you need in modern day GP. It's not about the sweet handling bikes anymore. They're 2010 and before that, really. The modern day bikes are, this is what you will ride. It will do this lap time. It's your job to stay on it and make it do this lap. And I think that's what the Ducati is. Obviously, Ducati is unbelievable in many facets, but I still think there's better bikes for handling out there than, we'll say, the bikes from Bologna. But really, I don't know what is going on, because you did mention there that Vinales is crashing twice in turn 1. He just does not crash. I know he crashed in Le Mans, but that was like a collision with another rider.
That's not like a crash. That's just an incident.
He never crashes. I think it was like 8 months of him being on there pretty before he had his first crash. It was
like Aragon, I think it was.
Yeah, it's just like it's no matter how hard he put it, it just seems like I always feel about Maverick because he doesn't crash. I wonder how close to his limit he is. But like he seems most weekend to show at least some sort of speed. Now of the last couple, he doesn't seem to know how to get a one lap out of it, and we all know he's weak at the start. So his race pace is always mirrored by his poor qualifying when he doesn't seem to get it going. But engine went pop today. Was shaking his head going out in practice and in qualifying yesterday. He looks like he's mentally lost it again. I think the whole loving approach from Aprilia, I think it's just slipped now. From maybe not even from their side. I think just Maverick again has gotten lost in the circle of life, and that is Maverick Vinales' GP career. Really, I think it's gotten to the point where it wasn't the M1 that was causing his issues. I think it's more him, and I think there's not a bike out to that he could jump on and would fix his issues. I think there's just an inherent flaw within his own psyche, and that really is a massive flaw in modern day GP. It's too competitive. The bikes are too close. You need to be able to believe in himself, and he just doesn't seem to do it. And I think when he has these weekends, and probably the crashes are caused by, he's probably starting to doubt his own ability now again, and I think it's just all going to his head, and it just starts to build. And I think we could be talking about a completely different Maverick if he has a good result in Le Mans, because then he goes to Mugello on a massive high, probably does better, probably doesn't go out in Q1, probably has a good race, probably has a good sprint, comes here and you never know, he might have had a great weekend. And I think that's just, it's always like that with Maverick, that any little it's like the butterfly effect. One small thing can set off a massive chain of events with Maverick. And with Aleix, I feel like he's past his best now. It's fair to say. I've kind of felt it from the start of the season. He's crashed too much. His pace hasn't looked amazing this year. Like you see him when he gets into Q2, it's like he's won a championship. He's celebrating so much. So I think last year was his chance and was his ceiling. I think this year he's probably getting a bit of more of a harsh reality that last year Pecco was crashing. Last year the Yamaha was not a bike to be on, but Fabio was doing outrageous things on it. Aprilia was good, and a lot of other people were not there really, and the KTMs were nowhere. So I think in a way it was a perfect storm last year for Aprilia. They couldn't capitalize on it. I still believe the bike is good. I said to Rhys before the start of this weekend, I think they need an A-level rider. I don't think Maverick is. I think he has the talent to be one. I just don't think he has the mental side of it. Aleix passed it. Journeyman, very good rider over his time, but not a superstar, not an alien, unfortunately. So yeah, and the fact that the top Aprilias were the satellites, I don't remember seeing the satellites all weekend. I don't think they got any TV coverage.
You've got the injured Oliveira still, and you've got quite frankly awful Fernandez this year.
Yeah,
so.
The only time I saw Fernandez when he was at the bottom of the waterfall pulling his gloves off.
Yeah.
That was
so I guess also you've got injured Fernandez there, in fairness, with that crash. Yeah. So
Aprilia have, I think they need to kind of plan a couple of years ahead with their recruitment, because if Aleix does pack it in this year or next year, I don't think they can rely on Maverick. Maybe promote Oliveira.
I think if Miguel can recover, I think he will be a good rider to pick up the mantle, because I mean, again, look at Portimao, he was going really well, so clearly the Aprilia was working. I think maybe the Aprilia just needs like a lot of days to get the setup right. And then,
could be.
Like, it might be one of those bikes, because, I mean, obviously Vinales has always been king of the test, but then that bike also seems to be the king of the test bikes as well. So, yeah, it's an interesting situation for Aprilia there. Certainly not an ideal one. It does look like the bike is struggling quite a bit. But we may as well jump back to the front of the grid again then with the Ducati battle. Obviously, we did talk about it a bit earlier. And again, you actually did mention before that Bagnaia does have a bit of a mistake in him. And today, I think he did probably make a small mistake that potentially did cost him. Quite lucky to stay on, actually, through the last corner on the penultimate lap. Tries to get the drive on Martin, just clips the back of him. The bike quite snaps them quite aggressively because of that. He managed to stay on the bike, but it could have easily been a crash with a front-to-rear contact. Then the front usually comes off worse. But it seemed like Martin had the better drive out of there. Bagnaia was just trying to match him, made a mistake. So, was that a little bit of a weird thing for Pecco to do there? Maybe should he have just sat back a bit, or was it just the fact he was riding so close to him that he was just maybe risking a bit too much and it finally kind of went a bit wrong there?
I think he realised that was his big opportunity to take lead, because I knew he was definitely unquestionably better on the brakes into one. He was
definitely. He was
he had a nice advantage. I saw him as he came into the last corner, and I said out loud to myself that Pecco's going for it into turn one. This is his chance. Like, I don't remember what I said, but I remember he's like, he has him in turn one, because he got so close out of Sachsenring curve into the final corner. He had like Martin just slightly went across the track just to cover off any chance of maybe a weird block pass to Bocca's run onto the last lap. Peck was right on the back of him, and he just took a nice sweeping line, had to risk getting as close to him, so when they kind of went up just over that crest, that he could nearly level him to make that gap. But it was just that one mistake. I think that was Pecco's race. I think Pecco had that. I believed heavily when I saw him coming into the last corner, the way he was so close, how he was shaping up to get the run out of the last corner to turn one. I just remember thinking, Pecco has this. And then they touched, and then, well, it was he did exceptional to get back to, what is it, half a tenth or whatever they crossed the line together. But it was never really going to be an overtaking opportunity, because I think turn one was the big one. Maybe at the end of the waterfall into the Saxon curve, but I think Jorge Martin was just too quick in turns 9, 10 and 11. I think it showed that he had enough whereabouts to know where Pecco was. But it's a fabulous race. We did mention it earlier, it was a great race, but it was great to see them battling, and Sachsenring has thrown up a nice little treat for us again.
Yeah, it'd be a good one to watch in a couple of years, won't it? To go back and watch. And hopefully we'll be able to see more, because I think those two, it could be a bit of a similar dynamic, like I said earlier, to the Bastianini-Bagnaia battle. But whilst we're talking about the Ducatis, they were dominant this weekend. They were dominant last weekend as well. Are we sort of stepping into Ducati GP at this point? Because 8 out of the top 9 were Ducatis. Obviously, there's 8 Ducatis on the grid. They were all in the top 9. The only outlier was Jack Miller, the KTM basically being the only bike that seemingly could take it to the Ducati. Just complete domination. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen a bike this much better than everybody else. I mean, I know the Honda used to be really, really good back in the day. We've had years of Honda dominance and stuff, but I don't think they've ever had sort of 8 out of the top 9 sort of dominance.
No, I think you always see, you go back right to 2015, 16, 17, the start of the season, the factory Yamaha was always... I'm going to way off tangent here to come back. Just give me a second, I'll get there.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit of an interesting one. The Ducati's really good, but the Yamaha, 5 years ago as well.
You see, in 15, 16, 17, when Zarco and Folger, we'll say, were on it, and that kind of period, it was very common to see the Tech 3 bikes way quicker than them at the start of the season. You would get to the likes of Le Mans, Mugello and Catalunya them times, and you would see then the factory bike come to its own. What we saw the last 2 races from Le Mans to now, well, we'll roll out Le Mans, we'll say Mugello and Sachsenring, is the 2023 bikes getting into their stride, getting way quicker than ever else. Obviously, now the 22 bikes haven't been dropped either, but it shows that they have so much data. The factory bikes have finally figured it out. They've gotten much quicker. They're much more consistent. They do clearly have an advantage, even over their own satellite teams. Whether it's as much as we think it, I don't know. It's never really going to be publicly let out, because even to the own riders, they don't want to be like, oh, well, yeah, the factory bike is so much better. But they just have gotten it dialed in now. We have data from last year. The 22 bike isn't a million miles from the 23 bike. It's a perfect storm for them at the moment. Everything's dialed in for them. They know what they're doing. They have so much data. Everyone on it is quick. Even Digi this weekend showed he had promise. He should have probably made it into Q2. He had a couple of chances in practice. Looked good in Q1, except for the weather probably caught him out maybe a small bit, but showed pace in the race, ended up finishing P9. Jack Miller was the only one to stop it from being 8 from 8, which would have been ridiculous. It was so good. I can't say enough about the Ducati at the moment. We've just seen them at the moment make a step. They've shown that at this point of the season they have dialed in their bikes, and at a track they haven't won since 2008. It was a wet race of all races, and I believe in 2008 that was the one where Danny Pedrosa was 10 seconds in the lead, and they put out 1.4. He was behind or ahead of someone, and he crashed. So technically, even then they were heavily beaten that day. They just got a bit of bad luck from Honda messing up their pit board. So it was so weird to see so many of them. They've been quicker for the last couple of years. They've been able to put in the odd lap here and there, and come to the full race. They've struggled, and it just shows that this year there was question marks whether KTM had put them under the cosh. Last year, Aprilia had run them close, but I think it just shows this year getting 8 out of 9 riders, getting 8 in the top 9. It just shows how critical that Ducati is to this championship. It is such a dominant machine. It's your Mercedes of the 2014, 15, 16 era. It is just streaks ahead of any other bike on that grid, and I think Ducati deserve it. They've thrown so much money. It's taken them years. They tried signing Valentino. They tried Lorenzo. Now they have the riders. They have the up and comings. They have the experience of Zarco, and they have the equipment. Everything is going right for them. So, I could see the championship being like 1, 2, 3, maybe just Ducatis. I could see it just so quick. There's just nothing anyone else can really do at the moment. I still think at certain tracks KTM will appear, Aprilia will appear, but week in, week out, we're not going to be seeing much other than Ducati dominance, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just going to be Ducatis, probably the podium lockout quite regularly now. I mean, I think top 4 in the championship are all Ducatis now that Binder crashed in that one. So, yeah, the Ducati seems to be the dominant bike, so we'll see if anyone can depose them at Assen, but I don't think they will. I do think it probably will still be the Ducati domination. Vinales does go pretty well there, so maybe the Aprilia will work there. The Yamaha in the past has worked pretty well at Assen, but you can't really bank too much on previous form anymore because they're just so much quicker. The amount of time they've found since like 2021 in terms of lap times for the top bikes is absolutely ridiculous. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you are listening on Spotify, please do rate us 5 stars, or if you're watching on YouTube, please do like the video. Really does help the podcast out. We'll be back next week for the Dutch TT at Assen, so we'll see you then.